Now that Season 2's been out for a couple of weeks and I've gained the collective M+ score of someone who will never touch a woman again, I'd say it's time to rank all of the dungeons in a tier list, from Pog to Bring Me Sweet Death. So while I do that, it's time for you to sit back, relax, and join me on the journey to discover which dungeons made me want to off myself. To start, we're going to be looking at a pretty decent dungeon, and that dungeon is Neltharus. One thing I like about this dungeon is the placement of the trash packs. They're all pretty evenly spread out, which makes it a lot more of a streamlined experience. I find that when the ads are not very evenly spread out in dungeons, it can sometimes feel like you're spending an absolute eternity trying to kill them. So yeah, an even spread, pretty good. They also don't have any really particularly annoying spells that you need to know about prior. Just think back to stuff like the Water Elementals and Temple of the Jade Serpent. Not a lot of people knew that you actually had to LOS it, and that was the death of all pug groups. So it's definitely good to not have to worry about something like that in Neltharus. The bosses are also all pretty simple. I mean, the first three are just dodge stuff, especially the third one. That one's piss easy. I mean, you still get idiots out there that still BL on the third boss, even though it's literally easier than Eranog. But hey, what do I know? I guess I'm just someone who isn't an idiot. The last boss can sometimes be a little bit tricky when people don't know what the mechanic is, but besides that, it's a pretty streamlined experience. The one thing that I'm not really a giant fan of this dungeon though is sort of the environment aspect. It's all very doom and gloom and full of Jarradin, and honestly I don't give a damn about the Jarradin, if I'll be honest. I don't think once I've thought to myself this expansion, wow, that Jarradin stuff's really cool. I mean, they're sort of just there. So yeah, if the scenery was a little bit better, I'd probably put it as S tier, but for now, it's going to be an A tier. Next we have Vortex Pinnacle, and I don't really think a lot of people are going to agree with me on this, but I actually really like this dungeon now. Although at the start I will say I absolutely hated it. First thing I think this dungeon does really well is its speed. This is the quickest dungeon in 30 minutes, which makes it feel a hell of a lot better to run than all the others. It just doesn't feel like it takes an absolute eternity to complete, and it's in a straightforward path. And trust me, as a tank, dungeons with a straightforward path is a blessing. If you have a choice of which way to go, you will always have someone complaining that you haven't gone the correct route. Like, how about this, random rep paladin? How about you switch to tank spec or you cope? The dungeon does have a pretty even split of packs between the bosses, which again I feel helps the flow of the dungeon. But of course some of the ads do have some odd mechanics in this dungeon. Some of the odd mechanics are stuff like the elementals that dip when you get near them, like a scaredy shroom from the hit game Plants vs Zombies Game of the Year edition. And the ads that have those interaction with the lightning triangle pyramid things. Honestly though, these mechanics are pretty simple when you get to learn them. Again, they were just really annoying on week 1 when no one knew what was happening and everyone was just dying to them. I mean, stuff like the triangle mechanic is pretty simple when you learn it. I mean, it's basically the hokey cokey. You go in, out, and I mean, you can even shake it all about if you fancy it. Some of the bosses also do have some quite unique mechanics like sky or die and get in the damn triangle. But again, they're all pretty simple when you learn how to deal with it. The aesthetic of the dungeon is also quite nice in my opinion. I mean, it's got some really nice bright colours, which is a lot better than the usual doom and gloom appearances of the other dungeons. And the music is just straight up chill, which as a metalcore fan, I shouldn't really be enjoying, you know, like, at all, but no, I love it, it's great. So yeah, Vortex Pinnacle is actually the best dungeon in my opinion. Now it's time to talk about Brackenhide Hollow, and this one's definitely a weird one. First part of the dungeon is basically like outside the fortress in a nice green field where you've got one boss and a lot of trash packs. Normally I would say areas like this where you have to kill an absolute insane amount of ads before you actually make it to the first boss are kind of annoying. But in Brackenhide, I think it's done quite well. For some reason, having the mini objective of freeing all the Tuskar makes it a lot better in my opinion. It doesn't quite feel as mindless as it would if it wasn't there, if that makes sense. Again, the environment I do quite like. It's just a nice open green field, looks very nice. And the music, strangely enough, gives me some Skylanders vibes, which I don't really understand why, but it just sort of does, and it kind of like it. The only problem with this first area is the first boss. For some reason, all the mechanics of the first boss seems to overload some people's brains and they just can't comprehend what to do. Like, I've had a lot of really dumb groups here that have just blamed it on each other when it's clearly their own fault and then left. But I guess at least you get one of these bosses nice and early on instead of right at the end like a stupid ass dragon that I remember from season 1. The second part of the Hollow is really where it sort of goes downhill for me. When you're actually in the fortress, it goes straight back to doom and gloom theme. The ads also have really annoying stuff like being able to take away some of your haste through poison, and some invisible ones that absolutely murder the DPS who aren't standing in the right place. Not only this, but no one can decide which route is better for some odd reason. And of course, as the tank player, you will of course go the wrong way that they all want you to go. You can literally switch it up every dungeon that you do, and you will still be going the wrong way. The last 3 bosses are okay, I guess. I mean, I don't really enjoy the boss fights. In fact, the more that I think about it, I don't really enjoy the fortress part of the Hollow, like, you know, at all. But that might just be the whiny groups that I've had going through this place. I don't know, maybe it's fine. Maybe it's just so overshadowed by the idiots of WoW. For me, Brackenhide is definitely going to be lower down on this tier list, but not right to the bottom, because the first area I still quite like. Halls of Infusion, to put it simply, is the bane of my existence. Even though it's not the longest dungeon, it feels like an eternity to complete one. You know why? Because no one knows how to deal with the fucking frogs. Nobody knows to focus the dragon. These stupid fucking water tornadoes really piss me off. And whenever I get the death protection buff, I'm pretty sure people just turn off their brain because it gets used immediately. It's like they're using it as an excuse to, well, I can just be an idiot now. The aesthetic and all that are like Neltharus, in the sense that I just don't really care about it. I feel pretty neutral about it, but the fact that I don't hate it is the dungeon's only saving grace. Honestly though, I'm just going to put it at the bottom before I get more irritated talking about this stupid piece of shit. To pick myself back up from that absolute aneurysm that the last dungeon just gave me, it's time to talk about the absolute godsend that is Freehold. It's really got everything for me. Fun boss mechanics like kick the bottle out of the alcoholic's hand. A fun pirate theme so everyone in VC can make dumb pirate jokes all dungeon. A pretty nice scenery to look at while you chase down a supersonic greased up pig. And the dungeon is another quick one at a 33-minute timer. I think the only gripe I've ever had with this dungeon is that some of the trash is spread a little bit more unevenly between the bosses. But honestly, it's fine when you just pull all the ads into the boss arena while a goblin does this whole RP thing about a greasy pig. I mean, what's not to love, honestly? Easy S tier. Underrot is a dungeon a lot like Vortex Pinnacle, where you need people to be going in with prior knowledge. And this is because of the bosses. They all have pretty unique mechanics that you really can't go in blind for. Groups can easily fail on boss mechanics just because one person messes up in a high key. Sure, with the first boss, you'd probably be alright losing 1 or 2 people after they decide to not dodge the snot ball that's running at them. But after that, you need knowledge. The second boss really requires you to keep it near the wall so then you can step on all the bugs really easily before they become alive and they start biting your ankles to death. The third boss needs you to be an evil gardener and destroy all of the mushrooms that are currently being planted on your lawn. Otherwise, you will get 7,000 stacks of the Black Death and you'll all die. The last boss requires you to kill little blood demons, walk around the room, and stand in the group whenever you get the golden circle. Now this is very important, so please listen up. Please do not take the golden circle away from the group to cleanse the floor. We need to get rid of our stacks. God, you could tell I'm still mad about some groups. The ads are pretty well spread out, and the only thing you really need to watch out for is fixated ads. But I'm a tank, I don't have an issue with that, so go suck a dick. When it comes to the aesthetics, I mean, you can really tell that the name fits the place. And although it does a really good job of being, you know, an Underrot, I don't really love spending my evenings inside what I can only imagine a chain smoker's lung looks like. Overall, I think this one is a very hard one to rate right now. Like, right now it seems to be a bit of a recipe for disaster for pugs, because no one knows the mechanics. But as time goes on and people learn, I'd imagine it will get a hell of a lot better, even if it does take about 4 weeks. So for now, this dungeon is going to sit in the middle of the tier list. Neltharion's Lair is a dungeon that can be summed up in one word: irritating. This dungeon has 2 fairly easy bosses at the start of it, but then the later 2 bosses can easily destroy groups that don't know what they're doing when they get there. For pugging, this dungeon can be an absolute nightmare. Because of the way it works, it doesn't reveal the hard mechanics until the very end, and therefore doesn't reveal that your group can't do it until the very end. So you tend to have a lot of people leave on the 3rd and 4th boss, and it's really irritating. This is because the tank won't know that they have to run away from the 3rd boss, or because the group doesn't know how to play around the rocks on the last one. I can't stress how annoying it is. The only thing that this dungeon's really got going for it is that the ads are evenly spaced out. I don't know, man, I'm still just annoyed about past groups. I'm really just exhausted by the thought of this dungeon now. Honestly, it's just going straight to C tier, because it's just annoying. But somehow, not quite as annoying as fucking Halls of Infusion. Finally, we have Uldaman, Legacy of Tyr. And surprisingly, even though it's definitely the longest dungeon this season, it sure as shit doesn't feel like it. The dungeon features 5 bosses that are pretty easy. I mean, the mechanics that they all have are basically all stuff that we've seen before somewhere else. Well, except for the Viking ship, because that, yeah, that's pretty unique. I will say that I was kind of expecting less trash to be in the boss, considering that, you know, they normally compensate. If they have more bosses, there's less trash and vice versa. But it's not really that much of an issue, it's just, you know, a couple minutes extra spent in there. The only problem you really come into with the ads is when people don't know that they need to LOS the infinite guys, but that's it really. The environment is actually really nice, I think. I mean, it's got that good old WoW Classic vibe, which, you know, it's pretty welcome. It's not too doomy and gloomy, and it's definitely not too flashy. It's just kind of nice. Overall, I would say this dungeon is an amazing one. The only thing that really brings it back for me is the fact that it's like 7 minutes longer than most of the other ones. But yeah, when you put everything together, it's a pretty good A tier to end on. Thank you guys for watching. If you fancy it, you can click on this video right here to find out what was good about Shadowlands. And yeah. You guys know I owned a kazoo? What if I can play it from my mask? Huh. Alright, bye.